All right, so Adam said 3 really important words. I'm a real big believer in definitions and distinctions so that we're all on the same ground as we talk about this morning, or as I talk about this. So let's talk about those words, and I'll start with innovation. For me, innovation is much more than the ideation that creates lots of great ideas. I think we're all really good. The world we've evolved as creative beings. We're all really good at coming up with ideas, but innovation to me, especially since I'm going to be talking about innovation for breakthrough for the future of future generations and the health of us now and in the future, is about taking those ideas to fruition. And this means evolving it to a product, service, policy, or community shifter, and making sure that there's uptake by the market. I have a really good friend who told me it's not an innovation until the market says so. So that's what I mean by innovation. By sustainability, I use the definition that came about actually in the mid-'70s. It related to the first Rio Summit for Planet Earth, and that definition is doing those things to meet our needs now without limiting the ability of future generations to do the same. And we specifically talk in 3 areas: economy, environment, and social justice, or social equity. So that's my definition of sustainability. We use the word sustainability to talk about a sustainable business. I've done that myself, but that's not the sustainability we're talking about today in terms of a distinction. Finally, culture. And culture is a big word that can be easily confused because we talk about the culture of tribal people, we talk about the culture of community, we talk about culture in the context of organizations. When I talk about culture, I'm talking about that, mostly about that latter definition, but it can relate to communities too. I would say I live in Seattle, but I have friends and have been up to Orcas a few times and other places in San Juan County, and I'd say there's definitely a culture here that's different than the culture in Seattle. So we acknowledge culture as something that we swim in. We don't quite know exactly how to define it, but here's how I define it. It's the way we believe that we do things around here, right? So you're either honest or you're not because it's the way you believe we do things around here. So we're talking about culture at the intersection of doing things for the future. So who recognizes this island? We're on an island here, but this is another island. This is one of my favorite pictures. It's not Earth rising, but it's from that same period, late 60s, early 70s. And the photos of Earth from space fundamentally shifted a couple of things. First, it shifted our understanding of our place in the universe. It was an, oh my God moment for a lot of us. It was so small compared to what we thought of it as. And I think that that idea of us in context made us think a little bit more about the fragility of the planet. And about that same time, an awful lot of the work that was going on around limits to growth became to be known. So this is an amazing planet we live on. It is, the ecosystem services here are beyond imagination. This planet's ability to provide us clean water and air and consistently clean up our mess has been pretty phenomenal. But we're really under a lot of pressure. It's getting harder and harder to do so. 7 billion plus people moving to 9 billion probably before it really flattens out unless something really dramatic happens between now and then. And we continue to increase our lifestyle as measured by GDP, gross domestic product. And there's a really gross part of gross domestic product, which is that it only measures throughput. The stuff you buy and the stuff you throw away or recycle in some way if you're doing the best you can. Doesn't measure happiness, doesn't measure satisfaction, doesn't measure resiliency, capability. It just doesn't measure those things. So we are continuing to put pressure on the planet as population grows and as we seek to bring people into a better quality of life. It's very important. This morning my husband read a statistic that we've been following. I think it's just astonishing. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but approximately the 85 wealthiest people in the world now have the same income as the poorest 3 billion. That's a for real statistic. It's kind of shocking. So, but I really am hopeful. And Gianna would call me a stage 5 optimist. I just don't give up. And I'm hopeful because of a couple key things. We are very, very good at evolving. We have an evolutionary capacity as human beings that's astonishing. John talked about, think about, just 20 years ago. Well, think about 100 years ago. Think about the loss of use of tools that we have developed between now and then. And last year's solutions, last century's solutions, last decade's solutions have created a lot of today's problems, but still we're pretty good at adapting and creating the capacity to move forward. So I really believe that we can do so, and I believe we must do so for the sake of the planet. And my idea for Orcas is that we are an island, the planet is an island, and we may be ideally suited to take island America to the world in terms of solutions. But to do so, we need to do something really, really profound and unusual, and that is to take evolutionary capacity and focus it in a very specific way. But we know how to do that. We need to provide some specific elements. The first thing you need in order to adapt and do a good job with adaptation is stress. The stress that humans respond to most often and best is emergency stress. You've never seen human beings at their best than when they're responding to emergency. Some people in my family make fun of me because I like to watch the Weather Channel. And it's not for the weather. I like to watch the shows of floods and people being saved off of roofs and all of that stuff. And I really, I'm not a disaster junkie. I just feel good about how humans respond in that moment. But what I also know is we need to bring that moment forward. We need to be able to respond in a non-emergency situation. So we need positive stress. And there are ways to do that and create that positive stress. And the best way is to build the emergency through positive performance. Something like this creates a certain kind of stress, right? You have to get prepared, you have to know your content, you have to be on time, 18 minutes isn't very long. And the second thing that you do is you get some kudos and rewards for it. The reason pitch events work so very well is because they create stress. And people with good ideas get those ideas better and prepared, and they work to improve it. So stress can improve our ability to innovate for the future. The next thing that we need to do is to provide some nutrition. And the nutrients that you need for innovation, to create great innovations, is food for thought, right? So you need to create context, you need to create knowledge, you need to bring together, just like this, the people who have different ideas and a lot of historical perspectives and projected perspectives, and share those perspectives wildly. And then the last thing you need is diversity. And there's a specific power to diversity as it relates to innovation. This is a picture of diversity in nature. And one of the things we know is that in nature, the most innovation, and nature is innovating all the time. There's evolutionary change happening in nature all the time. New species are being born, actually at a slightly slower rate now than species are dying, but it does still happen. Happens the most at the fringe, where the meadow meets the river, where the forest meets the edge of the mountain. All of these places where more species exist. It creates raw material. So diversity is incredibly important for the variety of ideas. And in human ideation and innovation, gender diversity, this always gets a little crowd interaction, so don't get upset. But gender diversity is particularly important because women have a different way of collaborating, and they're really good at doing what I talked about earlier, which is getting everybody's ideas on the table, allowing more collaboration to evolve, and holding off the moment where you jump to a conclusion. And that's critically important for effective innovation. So those three things can be brought together, and we could do that consciously and intentionally, and take the story of how great Orcas is to a legend of how we made things different. We can address the sustainability, the environmental, economic, and societal challenges of the future while creating great businesses and creating great economic outputs right now. It can be done. We don't have to choose between the future and now. We can bring it together, we can make it powerful, and we can make it happen. We can absolutely do that on an island. They create a great opportunity to test ideas. And with this right setting, this right context, the future that creates a joining together of ideas and growing, incubating, and accelerating businesses, an island also has a lot of the same challenges, every same challenge that the planet has that you have on an island, especially if you think about isolating that island. What would we do if we didn't have outside inputs? If we couldn't get our energy, our raw products, the things we needed somewhere else, how would we solve this problem? And then you export and test the results and improve it and export it again. Some islands would be better than others. My daughter lives in St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands, and I love it. Don't get me wrong, I love to go down there and visit her. But the reality is there's a fair amount of corruption on St. Croix. It has US in front of the Virgin Islands, but it's more like a third world country in terms of how the politics and things are really done there. And a test like this, where you'd say, how do you make a sustainable island, wouldn't work there. It would get too far off track. So an island that has the rule of law in place, where there is already existing a culture of integrity, and people want to see that happen, is a great place for this to test. So all islands are not created equal, sadly. Finally, I think that there are some really nice things happening in technology. John hit on some of it. Think Khan Academy. Think of the virtual possibility of bringing other parts of the world to someplace like Orcas, or someplace in the San Juan Islands, to give those inputs, to create the context and the knowledge, the nutrients, to actually even create the stress by sharing the stories of where crisis is happening when it's not happening here yet. Think how powerful that could be in terms of really bringing the technology to the island and the island to the world. So, and here's the last piece on this, which is prove, export, and repeat. So while you're building businesses here and you're improving the world, export it to other places and then repeat, and allow that to be a funnel for changing and shifting the opportunities in the world. There's so many challenges to take on, from energy to technology, the impact of technology on societies, to this whole issue of the bifurcation of wealth and what that will mean in terms of safety in the future and the potential for war, to water. I mean, we're going to have huge stresses with water. So my huge, huge challenge and opportunity that I see for Orcas is, let's take this island and tie the outcomes for this island to the outcomes for the world in a really profound and robust and exciting way. How about a legend? How about taking the story of this culture and turning it into a legend of the island that saved the world? Thank you.